everyone, welcome to the Chakra class series. This is part 1. Before we get started, I just want to touch on a little bit about science-related quantum physics and what that means, and how, just to give your analytics a bit of a massage here and let it know that what you do with your chakra system as far as energy healing goes is very much part of our reality. So our reality is really created from a combination of things, one being your emotional state, your mental thoughts, your behavior, so what you choose to do with your willpower and how you express it in the world. And lastly, the somewhat of a difficult thing to describe, your soul frequency, essentially the wave of energetic imprint that your body is hosting in this vessel, and that vibration mixed with the 3 other things we just talked about create a very beautiful you. And so if we're looking at quantum theory and we're looking at just quantum physics and how it relates to reality, everything responds to that beautiful you. So your vibration is very unique. Your reality is created like a projector from your body's sort of average, if that makes sense. So if you were to take all of those things and find an average point, that's kind of where your reality manifests from. So that's part of the holographic universe concept. And in a lot of ways, when we look at science and how they've done many studies on how waves work and how particles work, there's a behavior of electrons that's very interesting. They sometimes change and dematerialize, or they'll reverse in direction. And so in a lot of ways, electrons behave like little shapeshifters. And so scientists eventually concluded that that meant that subatomic particles are sometimes particles and sometimes they're waves, and they can instantly change from one to another. So that means that quantum is really describing something that encompasses both. And so it's really a nod to the principle of matter and energy having properties of both particles and waves. So what appears to be solid is actually on a more atomical level, almost 99% empty space. So this is what we are describing when we look at vibration and we look at energy and vibrating energy. So these protons and electrons are sometimes particles that can be measured, and sometimes they're waves that can be measured, and that's all what creates vibrational energy. So when we start talking about how we heal ourselves, it's very much using these concepts of how our reality is set up and how your cells of your body are regenerating themselves all the time and changing your experience and your day-to-day and how your body functions. This is why it seems that there's, miraculous healings happening almost instantaneously, and in a lot of ways, the reference to how these quantum physics and quantum theories relate to vibrational healing, it's really a deeper level of understanding the reality that we live in. So, if you want a visual, it's like thinking about having a rock and throwing it at the window, and sometimes it goes through the window. Other times it just bounces off, or maybe it bounces off and goes across the other side of the room, or maybe it can stop just before the window and hit the ground. It can break up and disappear. It can, dematerialize. It can reverse in direction, come back and hit you. There's so many variables to how something changes and what it chooses. So this is an example of how subatomic particles can choose to either be a particle or be a wave. And we notice that sometimes things shift from one to another, which is super freaking cool. When it comes to changing ourselves and changing our chakras and auras, it's really imperative that we have a bit of an understanding on why the things that we're doing with our tools here matter, and why they actually create the change that we experience. So it's not so wackadoodle crazy after all when you realize that you're just working with waves and particles of energy. The chakra system is a energetic reference to these vortices or vortex energy centers that run throughout your body, and you have many, many, many of them. But for the sake of just talking about these main ones, we're going to cover 7 in this series. An interesting way to think about the chakras, they kind of look like a wheel. They get skinny on the inside, and they create like a megaphone on the outer exterior. So this energy is, in a sense, circulating and pulsing all the way through your body from front to back. And this chakra continues to expand itself past the physical body. So in like the Russian doll concept, and you think about how each one sort of sits inside the other, building upon each other, that's a lot like what's going on with the chakra system, because you have layers that extend around your physical body that are your energy centers and part of the auric field. And so when we look at those aura layers, we actually find a multitude of chakras that like extend out like the Russian dolls. So when we think about the chakras, we also need to realize that each one of those is a lot like a projector screen. So it's creating the layer associated with the chakras. So your first layer around your body and your aura is created from the first chakra. Your second layer in your aura is created from your second chakra, and it keeps going. And so that creates this sort of Russian doll concept that I think is really helpful when we're thinking visually on how to just tune in and sort of sense and feel all of those truths. And so this circular movement of the chakras, the pace of it can change depending on what's going on. So sometimes it'll get really slowed down when it's very bogged, or there's a lot of information coming in and it's overwhelming, and maybe it's really stressed out, maybe it's sick, maybe there's a bunch of people's energy in your space and it can't spin at the same speed because it's getting blocked. There's so many things that contribute to the speed of our individual chakras, and each one of us kind of finds its own particular rhythm that we enjoy, or perhaps a rhythm that we don't necessarily enjoy, but we've gotten somewhat used to because it's just what we experience most of the time. So it's interesting to think about chakras as far as how they are this projector screen, because that means as we create a change in the chakra, we are simultaneously creating a change in all the other chakras and the aura. So all the layers of your aura will change based on you putting your attention, putting your healing, putting your intentions on a single chakra. And so as you can imagine, when you show up for a healing session for yourself or you're receiving, it is a profound change, because from the moment that you begin, from the moment you start moving energy in one chakra, you're creating a change in all of them, which means now your entire aura is changing. So it really affects the way you feel, the way you think, the way you're able to create your reality. It affects the way your physical body functions, and really anything that isn't yours that you're carrying around in your body, which happens because we're a lot like sponges out in the world, just picking up all kinds of stuff everywhere. So when that happens, it also creates an effect on the layers of your aura and your chakras. So let's say you're out in the grocery store and somebody gets angry at you for no reason and they're just having a bad day. Well, sometimes those people don't know it, but they will throw energy. And when they throw an energy at your aura, maybe it gets lodged somewhere around the 5th or 6th layer, and it gets sticky, and it kind of looks like some weird gunky mucus stuff when you're able to see it clairvoyantly. And it's really like a form of a psychic attack. Now, it's not the same as thinking about it on this like evil spell sort of level, but regardless, it's affecting you in a negative way. And so what happens is it will stick somewhere in your layer, or maybe it goes all the way to the chakra into your body. And either way, it's affecting you. So as it gets further in and closer to your physicality, the more effect it has, which ultimately changes your entire aura and also changes the way the energy is flowing through those chakra points, which can change the way that you function. So something as simple as having that type of interaction and not addressing it can actually cause some damage and become a very real issue for you. And, so imagine most of the world is walking around experiencing these things, experiencing all these traumas, having a lot of unhealed parts of themselves. And honestly, if you ask me, I think this is why we require sleep as a species. I think when we sleep, that's when people gain like this middle ground for a healing. So they're not consciously progressively healing themselves, but they are healing themselves in their astral body in their sleep state. And I think that has a lot to do with the why our bodies require so much sleep. But that just feels true for me. Certainly don't take my word for it. I'm thinking about how the dropping a pebble in the pond ripple effect is really just such a true analogy for creating change in our own energetic field. So when we look at chakra diagnosis, it can be kind of tricky because depending on where your energy is focused, so if you are a feeler and that's kind of your dominant sensations that you run through your body to interpret information, then perhaps you're going to need to really feel into those chakras to get a read on it and what's going on. If you're more of a clairvoyant and you see things when you kind of close your eyes and just sense and have awareness, there's also that ability. There's also just knowingness, which comes from the crown chakra. That is the space in which your energetic body just receives information direct from your crown center, and so you'll just know things. You don't know how you don't know where it came from, but suddenly you just are aware and you know. And so there's many different versions of sensitivities that each one of us have a bit more activated than the other. Sometimes we have all of them very activated. So it really is unique to who you are. And the vibrational healing that occurs either way when you put your attention on something, your healer energy starts flowing towards that space. So even if you don't know which one of your centers or which one of your sensory abilities is really activated or you're dominant, that's okay. All you have to focus on is just putting a clear intention and then focusing your attention onto that space in your body or that chakra or that layer or whoever you're healing. You just put your attention on it, and the moment you start to do that, your energy flows in that direction and starts to pick up information. So it's as simple as that, and it really doesn't require very much effort. But as you begin to really explore more and you want to learn deeper levels of awareness, then that's really where we're going to get into that type of enlightenment in your own auric field by going through these exercises together in this series. That's how you can really gain more access to your intuitive centers and really create a development that enhances them by both simultaneously activating higher vibrational frequencies through your body, but also just creating massive change and transformation by putting your attention on these centers. So the self-healing that's capable in this journey is actually really profound and up to you and up to how much you're willing and able to host the changes in your body. So there might be some people that experience, a very slight change at the end of the entire series, and for others it might be profoundly life-changing. So just keep that in mind, that anything is really possible. So, chakra diagnosis is just a fancy way of saying that it's a method to retrieve information about your entire body, about who you are as a spirit, information about your family, your upbringing, your childhood. It contains a lot of information about your mental state and your mind, how it's working in your brain, how your glands are functioning, your nervous system. You can pick up on really strong emotions that are stored in certain parts of the body that perhaps are out of alignment. If you have a lot of anger in your kidney, it might start to cause some kidney issues. And so really paying attention to certain emotions that feel really heightened and triggered and in places around the body can start to give you some insight on how to really heal those things, and also reflect and evaluate what it's really saying and calling your attention to. So it can be really moving and empowering to discover the things that our body's holding on to simply because it wants to remind us of a lesson or give us an insight that perhaps we weren't able to perceive. And sometimes there's little traumas that happen that we might not deem a trauma until we scan the body and realize that the body or the aura is definitely translating it as a trauma. So we become more aware about the world around us. We become a bit more grounded in the way that we approach our day-to-day life. And for that alone, the chakra diagnosis process is very, very valuable. So as we sort of begin diagnosing our chakras, we start to create a vibrational alignment just from having our attention there. So again, this doesn't require a whole lot of effort, but there's a lot that you can learn that is available to you if you choose to ask those questions and choose to be open to receive the answers. There's a cozy beginner space that's equally effective as far as healing goes, but it becomes really exciting. And for those who feel like seekers and want to know all this information, just know that it is available to you, and you can grow with your own self-healing and discover that inner voice and really start to get a stronger sense of what's communicating to you as you grow with your own diagnosis practice. This is not intended to take place of any doctor or any psychologist, of course. If those are things that people are seeking from you and you're offering this practice, or maybe you're just doing it for yourself, it's all good. I'm just mentioning that, of course, this is not to be taken as an implication that you should no longer go to your doctor or see your psychologist. That is not what I am suggesting whatsoever. Another really cool thing to think about when it comes to waves and particles and energy and vibrational healing is that each one of us actually creates sound waves. So our body gives off a sound that's unique to each and every one of us. And when we're looking at different options that we have, various forms of creating change in our aura and in our chakra system, we can also acknowledge that each chakra produces a very specific wave that produces a series of sounds. And so if we match that sound and create a type of toning through our breath and through our diaphragm and allow those sounds to become almost like a mantra coming out of our mouth, we allow and initiate a type of vibrational healing through our entire body and all of the layers surrounding it. So there is a sound element that correlates to each one of these chakras as well, and it does create massive change through the aura. This is also another reason why I offer sound healing with the bowls, because the bowls also tap into those same frequencies. And so even though we're not using the toning through our body, we are receiving the toning as our body is an antenna, and it's picking up on the frequencies of the crystal singing sound bowls, and it translates those vibrations and frequencies and tones through the body, just like imagining an antenna receiving a signal for the radio. So it's very cool when we look at the alignment of particular crystals and sound and aromatherapy and color and how all of them relate to each one of the chakras and create change in all of the layers. It's super cool. So there's a lot of different methods and things we could get into here, but I'm just trying to create a bit of a summary so you get a somewhat sense of what the chakra system and how the science behind it sort of makes sense. So when we look at the desire for your energy to become balanced, recognize that that is constantly changing. Your true balance is going to be something that is a ongoing journey. And as you reach a state of balance in your present moment, your state of balance might be different the next day and then the next day. And so you have this very fluid way of growing with the changes that you wish to make. And so as long as you have intentions to continue growing and you recognize all of your areas that need the perspective to be given some attention, and you work through trauma and you free your body from holding on to stagnant energy and other people's stuff and dense emotions, all these things, they all create you. And so what's going on is if we can address all of those things, then you end up creating a lighter sense of being and a lighter way of being present in your physical vessel. And it changes your reality. It changes the way that you feel. It changes what you attract into your life. It doesn't change who you are, but you may discover that you feel like an entirely different person after going through that journey. So that this is very much what an awakening experience is like. And through this intention, you really enhance your intuitive abilities and you start to become more aware of the subtleties of things that are communicating with you, the data that is there, and the spirit guides that are communicating, and your own higher self internal wisdom that is constantly serving you. And so there's just this shedding of old stuff and growing into your true power that allows your entire energetic system, chakras, aura, all of you to really evolve and grow. So there really is no limitation other than the ones that you place on yourself. So when we look at chakra diagnosis, it's important to recognize that you can do this from a distance. You can do it with your eyes closed. You can just sense it from across the room. You can use your physical hand if you'd like, but you don't have to. And so I just think that it's important to validate here that this is vibrational healing. And so you can do equal amounts of healing from a distance with your intention to connect with somebody from another area, or you can do it right there with your hands with the person right in front of you, or hands on yourself, or you can just sit with your eyes closed and imagine your etheric hand, which is your astral hand. Just imagining a hand moving something starts to create that exact change. So as a practicer, you can see that there are many different ways to train yourself to do this, and it's fun to play around with all of them. And so if you want to feel the energy of your own chakra, know that you can do it with either hand. There are no rules. Some people feel as if your dominant hand is the better hand to feel with, but other people feel that the left hand is more receptive. So again, I encourage you to find what feels good or feels right for you. I tend to feel with both hands. Sometimes I actually prefer, although I was born ambidextrous and was sort of forced to change to a right hand dominance mid-childhood, my right hand tends to really push energy through, and then I notice my left hand sort of pulls energy, and so that's just kind of my own interpretation of which one sort of prefers to do what, but I can also reverse it and continue to do the work. So that's why I encourage you to play with it and find what feels good for you, because just because one thing sort of stands out, if you don't play with the opposite, you might never know that you actually prefer that. So when you're sensing a chakra, you can use your hand. You can also use a pendulum if you'd like. Those are also fun to play with. A little bit difficult if you're standing up. They don't always, you can't hold them over the body really, but that's a fun way to really check the speed and kind of just get a sense for what's going on with each one of the chakras. But you can also do this same sensation by holding your hand over that general area and getting a read on it as well. So up to you, doesn't matter either way. And so the chakras are spinning, right? So they're these little cones of information and they're pulsing radiant energy out in both directions, both front and back. And so when they're spinning, you may notice that they are either moving in clockwise direction or they're moving in counterclockwise. And you might start to notice that maybe when you check them at the beginning, they're going one direction and then they start to change. And so all of these things are very normal. The counterclockwise position generally, to me, is a read that there's a release going on. There's some energy releasing out of that space. When the energy is moving clockwise, that's a general sign to me that energy is pulsing outward and moving through the body. So it's not so much of anything needing to be fixed or that being right or wrong, but what you might start to really get a better read on is whether the chakra feels like it's tight, if it feels like it's moving pretty slow, or there's not a very large charge. Maybe it's hard to even sense the chakra. So those things are a bit more concerning, rather than whether it's moving right or left. So there's essentially like a spectrum of chakra diagnosis, and you could look at it as like different stages of open or close. And so let's talk about that for a minute here. So when we look at a chakra, or we sense a chakra and it feels almost closed, you can barely find the spin of energy. It'll feel lifeless and weak. It's pretty rare that you encounter this type of chakra read on something, but it is mostly applicable to somebody that is close to dying or somebody that's very sick. I've never really gotten this on the average person. This is like once in a blue moon, somebody who was really close to their last days. So the circle spin is very, very, very slow, where you can barely feel the energy at all, and it also feels very tiny in size. So the average chakra is about the size of your palm, about the size of your hand, and so if you imagine that an almost closed chakra might feel more like the size of a dime, it's like very, very, very small compared to what a healthy chakra should feel or sense like. So again, very rare, but possible. So somebody with an almost closed chakra in any capacity becomes much more susceptible to physical illness as well, just because the body has no energy to really fight it off or defend itself, basically. So the next one would be a slightly open chakra, so pretty close to being closed and just barely open. Again, the energy is very slow and lethargic, and the size is probably about the size of a quarter. It's functioning at a very minimal level, and this is like somebody who's just like barely surviving. Like the will to live is not very strong. There's probably a sense of some kind of escapism or some sort of depression associated with that. I do find this occasionally in people. Usually it's just one chakra or maybe two, three at most. Very often there's a trauma associated, so it really just kind of depends on the person. But so the next one would be the less than half open. It's just slightly under half, and that energy is interesting because you can feel it, but it feels very sluggish. It's like if the healthy energy is going like pew 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 pew, it's this sluggish side is gonna feel like it's going pew pew, like it's just barely moving, but it's moving. The size is maybe like 2 inches or so, and it's functional. The chakra is functioning, but it's definitely not in its prime. And the energy is very weak in comparison to a healthy chakra. So it still feels like it can't really receive very well, and it can't really transmit a lot of energy. It's kind of a dull experience. So then we've got a slightly over half open chakra, and that might seem to be maybe about the size of just the palm part of your hand, so no fingers, just your palm, so much bigger than the half open. And the energy still spins slow, but it's more at the pace of like your heartbeat, so it picks up a little bit and it feels functional. A normal chakra. It's not prime, but it's pretty normal. Like a lot of people are working around things that are taking home in their space, right? So because your body's constantly having to work around stuff, this is kind of an average. The next one is still spinning at the pace of a heart, roughly, and now it's about the size of the palm and like one of your knuckles, so, you know, like about an inch bigger than your palm. This is like the very typical chakra read that I get. This is the size that, you know, I'd say like 75% of chakras are tend to function at, and then on the read, you know, on the initial diagnosis, and then as you start to create the change, it starts to open up and get much bigger. The spin is decent, and the chakra feels energetic, and it feels like it's in good health. So this is, you know, kind of the average. Then we've got like a wide open chakra, and that chakra is going to feel more like it's the entire hand, including the fingers, and the energy will probably spin at around the pace of the heart, maybe just slightly faster. This chakra usually feels very radiant. You can sense the energy from further away, like it's just like this beam kind of coming out. It feels dynamic and enthusiastic, and it feels like it can receive and give, and so there's a general healthiness and wellness to this type of chakra. So this is really an ideal change to see in yourself or in somebody. And the last two are pretty rare, but they are, again, possible. So there's like an extremely open. So this is where it spins very quickly, faster than the pace of the heart. The diameter is about the size of maybe two of your hands, including the fingers, so it's like really, really large. And the energy feels like abundantly strong, like almost repulsive for people to be around because it's that strong. And the energy will probably feel safe, but it will feel like coherent and also like it's beaming light out. So you're going to be able to get a lot of information from it, and that's what I mean by coherent. But it's also, this is a type of energy that if you're running this, you're going to trigger the shit out of everyone around you. And I mean in a good way, right? It's like a gift, but they're going to feel uncomfortable around it if they haven't healed something or worked on something in themselves. It basically sends a type of reflection into their space and reminds them of their unhealed wounds because you're at such a high vibration in this space. So this type of extreme openness in chakras is fairly rare, and usually we're in a temporary state of running that type of energy after like this massive transformation or healing where you almost feel kind of high, if you've ever had that experience. This is also what I see in people when they've experienced some kind of like Kundalini awakening or something. So then we have the last one, which is like extremely excessively open to where it's like almost dangerous. This energy is going to feel like it's going to knock you over and make you sick just being around it. The speed is like way too fast, so it has like no coherency as far as like picking up data. It can be hard, actually. It can be almost as hard to read as like a very, very closed chakra. So that's interesting. Like both extremes on both ends can be very difficult to read. So you have to really play with the sensory perception of whether you're picking up on an entirely closed chakra or whether it's just like excessively wide open. Sometimes it can be very slow and sluggish when it's this open because it just feels like weak and thin, and usually there's a pretty undefined shape where it's kind of like bulging out on one side, and it's usually not even like circular, so the size is kind of hard to describe, but it almost feels like it can't assimilate information, kind of like the concept of oil on water, how it just doesn't blend. It's going to feel a lot like that. And I also noticed that when I've been around somebody with one of these, it actually gave me a headache almost instantaneously. So I don't know if that's a common thing or not, but I do notice that when I pick up on this type of information, it does have some kind of physical pain like associated in my body because my body's saying, oh, this is like way too much. So again, when you create a change there, you're going to notice the ripple effect in the rest of the body. And it's interesting because, you know, we go, well, why would somebody have an excessively open chakra? What would bring them into that, you know, extreme sort of place? And sometimes it can be a certain type of personality that likes to spread themselves really thin and push it, and they're not really doing themselves a lot of service in that, and so there's like sort of a disconnect, and the body's trying to overcompensate, and it ends up really messing up your energetics. So those are kind of the stages that I look for with the chakras. Again, you want to be in this sort of ideal situation with at least more than half open chakra. There's kind of that average, and then the wide open. So somewhere in between those three is your ideal place to be. And it's really fun when you're doing healings on yourself or on somebody else to check in with where you are at the beginning, and then go through and get a read on your chakras at the end and just really note the before and after. It can be really rewarding way, especially if you get to pair up with somebody and work on them, to have that experience of just reflecting on your own change that you've created together or just for you. Now we're going to get into how chakras correspond with electrical energy. So this is electromagnetism, and basically as the electrical energy flows through our body and also is produced by the body, the magnetic fields around and within the body respond. So when we look at making a change in our electromagnetic energy, then we are also aware of the effects that it has on our entire field and the way that our consciousness works. So when your electrical field increases, then you experience that as, certain ailments going away. Maybe your thought patterns are really clear, and there's a sense of like an expansion in your consciousness. And, on the opposite end, if your electric field is decreased in vibration, then you can become really uncoordinated and very dizzy and kind of experience certain types of sensory awareness, or maybe it's like vertigo. And so like doing really simple tasks can feel really difficult. And it's interesting because, if you imagine creating a change in your electrical field on a consistent basis, then you're basically agreeing to carrying out this, physiological process change, as well as a spiritual change and an emotional change, and this sort of advanced level that repetition of routine brings you to makes a permanent change in your electromagnetism, which can express itself as a greater state of an emotional well-being, a higher sense of your higher self, so your consciousness palpably changed, and the physiological processing and the physical body may also be something that you're able to note. And if there was ever any type of anxiety or depression or learning issues or disabilities, stuff like that can really change as well. There's just an experience of phenomenal higher levels of electromagnetic energy that comes in when you have the intention to heal yourself. So that in and of itself makes it easier to concentrate and focus, and a better sense of bodily awareness and your own intuitive guidance. So it all works in terms of waves and electromagnetism. And so frequency is really moving in what we call hertz, and as the energy moves in a cycle type of form, it creates a complete wave, and there's the rise and the fall of the wave, a lot like we see in the ocean, and that's what really enters your body and creates this massive change. So this happens with sound frequency. It also happens with initiating change through energetic healing. So it's very sciencey and yet you don't have to understand all of that to be able to do the work. So the chakra system is really an intelligent part of you that is constantly working for you, and by you just showing up to work with it on a conscious level, you start to create much more of a power play in your vibrational field that allows your higher self to embody the physical. And so there's a really beautiful symbiotic relationship between your energetics and the way that you're choosing to create your reality. And because we have a lot of chakra teachings associated with different spectrums of color as well, we can look at even measuring that as far as wavelengths go and Hertz frequencies and things of that nature, because each individual color and light has its own profile. And so as we initiate, even just the visualization of certain colors and essentially bathing that chakra with that color, or bathing the entire body with that color, it initiates that wavelength into your body. And so the increase in the frequency really can change the entire spectrum of how your body is responding to particles of energy, which, a lot of energy revolves around even just how we take in the sunlight outside, and can change the way that our body relates to one another, and how we relate to the planet, and how we identify and view ourselves. So these things are very interconnected to our personal growth, and that you can create such a massive change just from something as simple as imagining a certain color and bathing it through your body is really a cool tool to take with you. So even if you don't understand that, violet light frequency is between 680 hertz to 800 hertz or whatever, it doesn't matter. You don't need to know that. You just need to have the awareness that you are creating a change with your intention, and the color comes in and changes the wavelength forms through your body and moves you from a relatively low frequency to a progressively higher one. And through that change, now you may perceive it as having a higher amount of energy in your body, or maybe you feel really receptive, or maybe you feel like you have a clear state of mind and more balanced emotions, things like that. So as we get into teaching about the different chakras and the associated colors, I really encourage you to play with there being no rules on which color is best, because you might have a very particular trauma associated with a certain frequency, and so maybe a different color works better for you in your psychic healing here. So when you visualize something, there's a lot of common practices to put in violet light or white light or gold light, and I think those practices are really generic and do typically work well. However, if you're feeling intuitively I don't know why I just keep feeling like I need to use green, or I need to use yellow or pink, then by all means please play with that. There are no real rules here. We're looking at different types of combinations that are going to work well for you, that are always available to match the frequencies that you're really aware of, that are unique for your current perspective, and the interpretation that you're getting is always going to be the most accurate, because it's what you are creating for yourself. So color is a subjective experience. It's really the eye really governs how we perceive that. And, there's people who are colorblind and things like that. So it's not really about seeing the color. It's just having the intention and the wavelength and the frequencies that come from that intention. So I hope that makes sense. But this piece here is I'm just intending to take some pressure off of you to have to memorize everything and, have a list in front of you and know all the energy, hertz and frequencies and stuff. And of course, those things are available to you if you want to go there. So it's all good. But whenever we're talking about just Hertz frequencies, it's really just grasping the vibrational connection between sound and light. And when you're doing healing work, you're working with both. The more specific that we are using photons and things as we choose to intend that change, then all of the living cells in your body start to emit electromagnetic waves, which then produce new cells that are healthy, and it begins to emit more and more of them and not less. And so there becomes a change in the entire spectrum and the range in which it's visible becomes a bit clearer. So I do see a correspondence between, the more healthy and vibrant and alive something is, and the more it's running that really light, higher Hertz frequencies, the more I'm actually able to see it even with my eyes open and not just my third eye. So, this is why people can pick up on frequencies and hear different sounds in their ears as well. And that ties into smell as well. So again, all of the vibrations are waveforms, and they all intersect and communicate with one another. And you can always measure the frequency if you'd like, but you can also just know that you don't have to have all of those pieces. So when we look at how the vibrational healing affects the body, we look at the different types of brain frequencies. And so there's different spectrums of how every day we change where our consciousness is operating from. So if we were constantly recorded and measured and hooked up to, EEGs, we would know what our Hertz frequencies are. But generally, when you are in your normal waking state and you are having a conversation, or you're just very alert, maybe you're at work or just functioning in your day-to-day, generally you're running beta waves, which is about 15 to 40 Hertz or so. And this is the same type of waves that you're going to run when you're focusing in meditation. It's just really about the vibration of focus. So if you can think about it in that way, then you sort of get out of the way that you need to be in a deeper level all the time, because even being in a beta wave state is effective for focusing in meditation. So the more relaxed and receptive you become as you begin to focus on something, your brain will actually shift into a slower and higher in amplitude, and you'll drop into alpha, which is from 9 to 14 Hertz. And so this is where the brain goes into types of reflection and a deeper level of meditation, and everything becomes a bit more nonlinear, and there's a lot more intuitive awareness and less analytical thinking, really. So then as you drop even into a slower space, you fall into what's called theta brainwaves, and this is when there's a 5 to 8 Hertz, which is really working with the subconscious. So this is where real deep hypnosis, meditation, really intense visualizations, more of that healing on the shamanic level. And it can also tend to really kick in when you're doing something such as a task that is really repetitive, like maybe driving for a really long distance, or running or walking or sewing, things that you can just kind of do and sort of leave the body at the same time because you're doing it so repetitively. So it's very much connected to out of body astral travel or out of body healing. So this is the region of sleep where we have very active dreaming and REM sleep. So, and then that shifts actually into an even lower frequency and a high amplitude called the delta. So delta brain waves are about 1/2 to 4 Hertz, so they're really, really low. And they only occur when you're in really deep restorative type sleep, and when you're having a really profound meditation, or really, really deep into hypnosis. So that's really the only time you're going to really experience that level of brainwave naturally. So those are the 4 types of brainwaves that are always present, but usually there's only one really dominant at any given time, depending on what you're doing and what's going on. So as it relates to sound healing, we create a binaural frequency, which is essentially when there's 2 different signals producing a third sound. So if you have a measurement of 300 Hertz in one ear and 30 Hertz in the other, the brain integrates both of them and produces a third. So it's it causes the brain to shift into really high alpha, and sometimes even like a really deep theta brainwave state, and it enhances your creativity and lucid dreaming, and it creates like really extraordinary healing brainwave frequency patterns. So usually it takes like really experienced like yogi type people to experience those states of consciousness. But if you have binaural frequencies like that, where you've got two different frequencies, one coming in one ear and one in the other, and it creates this like loop, then that pattern can actually initiate like the deepest below delta state called the epsilon state. So this is when like the right and left hemispheres tend to synchronize, and it can be like a moment of epiphany or great deep inspiration that seems to come from like a higher you. And so it's really nice to have that when you're meditating and you're using something to help you create that state, because it really gives you clarity that you're seeking, especially if you're like trying to find the answer to a problem, or you're trying to really let something go, or you're trying to figure out what your next move is. There's interesting associations with different forms of sound healing that relate to the chakras, because as we know, when you show up for sound healing, you move those frequencies through the body like an antenna, and it creates a totally different brainwave state, and moves energy through the chakras, and moves energy in all the layers all at the same time. So it's really profound. And then lastly, as far as the brain waves go, from 40 to about 100 hertz or more, and that's known as the gamma brain waves. And so this is like significantly high range, like hyper gamma. And this is when you have an experience of information coming from all of your senses, all of your sensory awareness, like all together for like a higher level awareness of your own like unity. So these are the types of experiences that you have during like a shamanic trance or some kind of like mystical, initiation of sorts. And so these are like ecstatic states of consciousness. And there's even like a higher one in the 200 hertz range. I don't remember what it's called, but there's really, those are kind of the basic things that are just fun to know when you're working on the chakras, because as you are making a change there, you're actually changing the brainwave states as well. So if you're healing yourself, you're going to notice that your own brainwave state starts to shift during your own healing of just putting your focus on one of your chakras. Pretty cool. Because remember, your chakra is giving off a sound and a frequency, and it's going to start to change the way your brain is functioning. So that's why. And so when we think about how our bodies relate to the planet actually is measured at a frequency of 7.8. So this would be like just at the top of theta, bordering on the alpha brainwave. So, somewhere between deep meditation and kind of like daydreaming. And so this is an interesting frequency, because as you sort of tune into that earth frequency, you can actually pick up on data and information, the memories of earth and all of the creatures that have inhabited it, and any potential information there about the past and future. Essentially, we're looking at information, known as the psychic library, the Akashic records, where everything that's ever happened on the planet are stored. And so as you start to play with this idea of frequencies and just matching frequencies, it can be really fun to give yourself this instruction, this body instruction of, okay, I'm imagining and just intending to connect to 7.8 hertz, and just know that you're really matching the vibrational frequency of the planet, and just notice what you notice. It can also be a fun tool when it comes to really sensing a change in the chakras, especially your root chakra, playing with matching the root chakra to the earth frequency, and just noticing what leaves even just from that, how much you can really release from the body that's ready to go by just having this intention to match the planet. Those are just things to kind of play with, and of course there's so much more I could say. There's even tones that are associated with the body. So when we look at the range of music, and we understand how like C, for example, is corresponding with the root chakra. So it is the same type of healing as looking at the Hertz frequencies, but we're just looking at the note of C. And so playing different Hertz within C are actually going to affect the entire body and not just the root chakra. But if you measure the root chakra, there's an association through the traditional teachings in music that matches our body, which also creates a massive healing in and of itself. So if you think about listening to classical music, it quite literally heals you. And so, there's interesting ways that we can understand the overtones and other frequencies that come through, that it's not just about the ear sensing the tones, it's about the range of sounds that come from even human voice and all of the sounds that the universe is making, and also, of course, musical instruments and things of that nature. But your food even has frequencies that your body is picking up on, and animals and anything with light. And so there's just such a range of things that are all creating this very interesting soup of energy that the body is constantly interpreting and assimilating and integrating and moving through. So, thinking about the frequencies in your home and how we're affected by radiation and some of the EMF waves, these are all things to think about. Even just lasers, we have lasers and laser lights and things, and even the light bulbs in our house and computers and all these different responses that we have on a cellular level to frequencies really affect our chakra system. So it's really important to open our chakras and increase our energy flow, because the more energy we let flow in, the healthier we become. And really it's the lack of flow in the human energy system that eventually leads to diseases and illness and death and all kinds of chaos, right? So, but even on a minor level, it can distort our reality. It can give us very odd, warped perspective. We can't really perceive things with clarity. It can mess with our feelings, where it dampens our mood and interferes with having a full life. And so it can be interesting to think about this on a psychological level, how it affects us as well. And even when we go to initiate change, if we're not really prepared energetically for how to receive that, then we can't really reach our full maturity, and we can't really reach clarity, and things sort of aren't processing in the way that they are able to. As we look at even just the different sensory perceptions that are associated with each chakra, we will notice that even the perception can be heightened, and you're aware of more data, more information, you have more answers to what you're trying to psychically read, because now your senses are enhanced through your own essentially vibrational maturity. So the chakras of the auric body really have major functions in how our life works. They vitalize our physical body and the entire auric body, so the layers around your body, and it works very closely with your own perception, even on just how touching something is, or how feeling, or how hearing, or smelling, or tasting something is, or seeing with your sixth chakra. And so really your perception is very much based on how your chakras are functioning. You have feeling centers, you have willpower centers, you have mental centers, you have many layers of layers around the body that are essentially other bodies. So each one of these corresponds to the chakra that is projecting it into creation. So, your root chakra at the base of your tailbone and at your spine there creates the etheric body, and your second chakra and your reproductive center creates your emotional body. Your solar plexus and your third chakra creates the mental body. Your fourth chakra and your heart center creates your astral body. And your 5th chakra in your throat actually creates a more physical aspect of the etheric body. So there's a couple different interpretations on that, but your 6th from the center of your head and your 3rd eye creates your celestial body, and your 7th chakra in your crown creates your etheric body, or what I like to just call the cosmic body. And so those top 3 are really just on like the spiritual plane, and the 4th is on the astral plane, which is really the bridge between the physical and the spiritual, and the lower 3 chakras are all on the much more closely associated with the physical plane, with your etheric body, emotional body, and mental body. Now we're going to get into the first chakra, which is your root chakra at the base of your spine, and how it corresponds with all the other major chakras, and how it's associated with your physical body, and what we can do to create change there, and sort of explore and ask questions and figure out how it's functioning. So this is a process in reprogramming the body and getting yourself on your primary energy source, really aligning yourself with your path, and keeping your perceptions really clear, so that way your reality can be supported by having the right foundation and structure, like a sparkly light, and functioning in its highest grounded form. So let's get started.